Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be doing a video with both on booktube and authortube crossover appeal. This is about the importance of front and back matter in novels, particularly for historical and multicultural books. And I would like to apologize in advance. The neighbor is doing some obnoxiously loud yard work right now, so I do apologize if that picks up and gets into the video. And so anyway, I published this on the 20th of February this year, 2023, and it's kind of based off of a previous post I did about the importance of a glossary, but it really jumps off, and I will be using some examples from some of my own books right here about different things and choices I have used. So anyway, the front and back matter are very important parts of a book. While the amount and type included varies by genre and length, there should always be at least a few of these components in any book. It shows readers you put a lot of time, effort, thought, care, and research into your book. It should go without saying that the first 3 pages are always the title page, the copyright page, which needs to include a disclaimer saying the book is entirely a work of fiction and or any real people included are used fictitiously, even if some pedantic, obsessive, puritanical nitpickers get upset anyway, or they don't even read that, like the troll who gave me a really, really nasty personal attack 1-star review on Goodreads, but that's obviously a topic for another thing. And the dedications page are also within the first 3 pages of a book, and I do have a future video planned more in depth and detail about how to format your book, including what all goes on those particular pages. So look forward to that if you're interested. But what comes after those first 3 pages, where you're pretty much required to do those aforementioned essential elements. Number 1, an author's note. Depending upon how important it is that readers know something. And Jakob flew the fiend away. I included it in the back matter to explain a few things which people might have wondered about or wanted more information regarding. Like, for example, this was I apparently found out later my aunt was kind of confused about this topic, so I decided to include that when I later did the reprinted paperback edition and the hardcover edition. There were a few things here and there I added. It didn't hugely increase the length or take really anything out. It was just basically just a couple of lines and paragraphs I added here and there, and a few other things I took out. So why Jakob's father is so well preserved after almost 5 years of burial, when the neighbors exhume him so he can be moved to the Jewish cemetery in Amsterdam. And I explained that was because of a copper coffin and embalming. And I also explained the function and demographics of Westerbork, the Dutch detention prison camp in Holland and the Netherlands. So I just felt that was really, really important. Maybe people didn't understand that. And I also included a couple of notes, for example, explaining most well, not most, all Dutch women are historically and traditionally to this day, they are Lucy Stoners. They don't give up their birth surname when they get married. They are basically known by the name they've had their whole lives, the name on their birth certificate, but they still use the title Vrouw, Mrs., and the style Mevrouw, like my lady, which is only used in direct address, just as it was customary in the English-speaking world until fairly recently for all adult women above a certain age to be called Mrs., just out of common respect, because even if this woman wasn't, well, obviously some women would prefer to be called Miss. Obviously, if they weren't married, they would think, oh, how could someone disrespect me and think I was ever married? I'm a spinster, I'm a holy virgin, or whatever like that. But for a large part, many women were just called Mrs. as a courtesy title, particularly servants, for example. But I know, but obviously that we have the title Ms. now, and I know that's I'm sorry I'm rambling, but it's just I just really wish the English language countries had done what the French and German speaking countries had done. I think it was in the 70s, they repurposed the 2 existing titles for women. So, only the one was used for very little girls and very, very old fashioned or older women who never married. And then there was the one title who was used for all women, adult women, regardless of their marital status. And I also explained why I chose to use metric versus imperial system for the ease of, readers who might not be familiar with one or the other, and the jumping off of death trains during the Holocaust, and so all sorts of interesting things like that. And you might think of other things you might want to include in your own books, particularly what the topic is all about, or maybe if you're not a writer but you're a reader, just things you would be interested in knowing more about in the front and back matter. And so anyway, I'm really, really sorry about that obnoxious yard noise, such as the reality of modern American suburban hellscape. So in my Atlantic City prequel books and Journey Through a Dark Forest, I included these notes and stuff in the author's notes. In the front matter, I wanted readers to know from the jump that the former is meant, the Atlantic City books, they're meant as a mix of historical fiction, social satire, and spoof, and that I deliberately made the starting ages of the main characters ambiguous. In the latter, in Dark Forest, I explained this is one huge book put out in 4 volumes, and basically like the word count of the original draft, and then the second edition, and then like the final edition when I finally put it out in print editions like that. So obviously, if that's something a reader would be very confused about, like, oh, why aren't these characters' ages given, or why did you publish this in 4 volumes when it all has the same title except for the subtitle? And so, oh, that's why it is. So obviously, like, that's something you want to let people know about. If not, knowing it would just confuse them or make them give the wrong idea or something like that. Number 2, obviously, the table of contents. I always title my chapters and parts, and many times my chapter titles come from like song lyrics or poetry or lines from literature or famous quotes or like movie titles or things like that. It's kind of a fun Easter egg for people who also have that interest, particularly if they like the same like writers and like singers and stuff and actors and with the same retro taste as I have, and they get those references like, oh, that's a kind of like not a joke, but just like a thing, a common bond that we have in common between us. Number 3, a cast of characters. I don't know why this is so uncommon nowadays, since it seems just a basic courtesy, especially when a book has a large ensemble cast, to provide readers with a list of names. In my Atlantic City books, I divide them by important families and Simi's other friends. In Little Ragdoll, I group them by family, friends, enemies, and the second generation. I also listed their birth dates. In my Russian historicals, characters are listed in order of appearance, along with birth dates and brief descriptions of them, like, for example, Lyuba's 8th-born stepsister, Ivan's best male friend, a friend of Lyuba's youngest stepsisters from their orphanage days. And I've also done written out by hand these casts of characters for my eventual prequels for my Russian novels. And I was, how pretentious I am. I didn't write them in English. I actually wrote them out in like the Russian characters. So, I absolutely love like writing in Cyrillic. Maybe someday in future I could do a video showing you guys my handwriting examples in like, English and Hebrew and Russian and cursive versus print. Obviously I did a video a while ago, like showing my ambidextrous writing and like showing little examples from like the right versus the left hand created writing. But I would really be interested in doing maybe a future video just like showing you guys examples of my handwriting stuff. That would be really fun. Number 4, I always include a note on Russian pronunciation and names in my Russian novels. This also briefly explains my transliteration style, like, for example, why I choose to use the native Russian names of some cities like Moskva instead of the common English name Moscow. I'm really sorry about that obnoxious neighbor doing the yard work, by the way, and like other things I do include in the Russian novels, and the note on the names and stuff in the beginning is like, why I use certain transliterations for Ukrainian names of cities obviously out of respect for the Ukrainian people and such like that. And also when it's like appropriate, when there are a lot of Belarusian characters in the cast, I also include a note on a Belarusian patronymics, how they work, because they are formed a little bit differently from Russian patronymics, and obviously Ukrainian patronymics are formed still differently. They're like very, very similar, but they just have slightly different letters that they are formed with. And now for the back matter. A glossary, which I divide into categories: insults, food, terms of endearment, family, like, for example, the words for grandparents, parents, aunt, and uncle; courtesies, for example, please and thank you; historical references; and miscellaneous. In Movements of the Symphony of 1939, which is my second chronological Atlantic City book, I also included a section for German numbers, since there's a scene with a German bingo tournament at the kosher butcher's for Thanksgiving. He's giving away a huge turkey to the winners of the bingo tournament, as well as like lots of like fun goodies to take home, for like potatoes and vegetables and hard-boiled eggs, or like maybe they were not hard-boiled, I'm forgetting already, but just like really cool stuff. And I absolutely love German numbers. That's like one of my little weird pedantic quirks ever since I learned the German numbers when I was 15. I always count in German. Sometimes I've even blanked on the English number. Like, for example, when my father was helping me learn to drive when I was 25. Yeah, I was such a late bloomer. He looked like, what's that like speed limit sign? Because I was so like, I guess going over the speed limit or maybe not going over it. And I was like 45, and I like completely didn't know. Like I completely forgot the English word was 45. So it's just like one of my little fun like quirks. Number 6. Sources consulted, listed in order of when the pertinent information is incorporated into the book. These include websites, books, newspaper articles, magazine articles, and films. It's up to you which citation format to use. If it's not obvious from the URL, I note in parentheses what the source is about. In my hiatus work in progress, the strongest branches of uprooted trees, the bibliographic citations are grouped by subject, for example, Hungarian names, Budapest, Shoah history, Aboni, which is a small city in Hungary, Hungarian history, Florence, the city in Italy, Paris, Nantes, another city in France, and Béziers, hopefully I pronounced that name correctly. It's a city in southern France that has a really, really fascinating and also tragic history. It's one of the cities I would most like to see when I visit France someday. Believe it or not, Paris is not one of the top cities I want to see. I mean, obviously I'm interested in seeing that, but it's just like I've always been much more interested in cities beyond like Paris, I guess, just being different from the crowd on purpose, oppositional, defiant. Number 7, the story behind the story. I love writing this for each of my books. Their length varies, but they all discuss how I got the idea, my writing process, how some things changed along the way, my favorite and most emotional moments, things like that. It's like one of the things I absolutely most look forward to when I'm writing a book, because I get to talk in my own voice and just talk so personally and emotionally about all this like fun stuff. Number 8. In my alternative histories, I have an alphabetical list of the real people in the story, including their real-life birth and death dates and short biographical profiles. And I will be showing you guys a little bit of examples of these like front and back matters in the books, which I have in front of me. Sorry if I forgot to do that earlier. Number 9. Relevant appendices. In And Alexei Lived, I included wrestling with the house laws and realistically managing hemophilia to explain and defend the plausibility of the decisions I made regarding those subjects. Little Ragdoll originally had a whole boatload of appendices, but I deleted them all. They seemed so irrelevant and like gilding the lily and showing off my research. Like, seriously, I'm kind of embarrassed for myself when I look back and think like, why would the average reader care about lists of books, songs, albums, toys, and real places in Manhattan mentioned, or the popularity of characters' names and their years of birth? The names appendix did make it into the first print edition from the book, but I later took it out. I was just thinking like, who cares? Even if you're a name nerd like I am, why does that even matter? I mean, maybe it's kind of interesting, but like, why? That just has absolutely no relevance at all to the overall story. Although, like, if you are interested in names, I am planning at some point. It's been like on hiatus for a long while, but I do plan to get back to it at some point on my main blog. It's called a primer or a primer on like XYZ names, like names from all sorts of different languages around the world. And when I finally finish that series off, I do plan to expand each of the entries in the series and like publish them in a whole book, like with more historical background and like linguistic and onomastic stuff and bigger lists of names. So look forward to that if you are interested in names. I'm really looking forward to doing that kind of book. And number 10, about the author. This should only include a brief biographical sketch with relevant information, for example, where you went to school, what your degree is in, your areas of genre-related expertise and interest, where you live, and a list of your other published works. Mine originally had way too much irrelevant information, like listing a bunch of my favorite things like artists, holidays, comedians, hobbies, actors, etc. Like, seriously, who cares? It just looked like so freaking amateurish. I'm embarrassed by it, but thankfully I have like taken it out of most of the books that have since gone into, well, they're obviously all in print editions, but a few I still need to go back and take them out of. When I'm really looking forward to like doing that, so people won't look like, oh, this person is just an amateur, because I do have a much more like professional and to the point about the author section in all of my books right now. And number 11, this isn't necessary, and I haven't included it in all of my books, particularly since many of my books are very long, and you have to be cognizant of the page count, particularly for your print edition. So if it's like going over, you don't want even one more page, because every page counts when you're writing a deliberate doorstopper and saga length book. A colophon, a brief note about the typefaces. And so like, what kind of front and back matter do you guys include in your books, or do you like seeing in books when you look through, or you when you read them. And so I'm just like going to show you the examples right now. So obviously this is Jakob flew the fiend away, and I obviously did the name of the. Oh, I guess maybe I did forget to mention. Sometimes you can also put quotes in the beginning of your book, but obviously you have to make sure you get copyright permission. I will be going over that further when I make a video about like how to format your book and what exactly goes on each page, and obviously the cast of characters and such like that. I do like using them for the. I'm sorry, I'm totally blanking on the word. I guess the heading. That's the word, in the same typeface or font as the chapter headings and the on the book and stuff like that. This was Wellingborough, one of my absolute favorite fonts. I totally walked off with a huge deal. I got the entire 6-font family for free when I found it on, it was like Duff Font or 1001 Fonts or whatever. It was in April 2014, just a month before this book came out. And like, seriously, that was, if I had to pay money for them, it would have been $54 for all 6 fonts in that family, but they were offering them for free. That was like one of the best sales ever. It was just, like absolutely totally awesome. I love like fonts and stuff. And here's the story behind this story. The sources consulted. Also, you should look, particularly if it's been a long while, or if you're republishing a book or whatever, look through the sources consulted for the URLs. Sometimes, unfortunately, they're dead links, so you should put a new link, just maybe if it's an archive.org, or if you remember, if it's obvious from the URL, like explaining what it was about, because obviously like people might be disappointed if they want more information. Oh, this looks like a fun link, but it turns out to be a dead link. And then there was the glossary and like the notes and stuff. Like I had done that in the about the author thing, and just like in the front I had also explained. Did I explain? Yeah, a few things just about I'm sorry if I'm just rambling. And this is technically the sequel, but I consider it like the second volume of the same story. I did basically the same stuff, like about the author, the story behind the story, the glossary and the notes and the cast of characters and such like that. And this is Little Ragdoll. I don't have copies of all of my books, which have been published in print editions to date. I am going to be rectifying that very soon in future. On as I mentioned, I had listed all the characters by the groupings, like the family, their friends, like their enemies in the second generation, and things like that. And this is like the really important one, and Alexei lived, where I included the appendices about the real people in the story and just different issues and how I dealt with them. Like, for example, realistically managing hemophilia, how would I have Alexei not only surviving childhood but living to adulthood and even living into old age, and the epilogue. And I explained my thought process and how things could have been handled in real life had he really been rescued, or if his parents hadn't been so like bizarrely like overprotective at the same time as they were. Oh, just let him play and do whatever he wants. And oh, what a surprise, he's laid up in bed for a few months again with a huge attack. How did that happen when we were just letting him do whatever he wanted? Oh, but we're also not going to let him ride horses or play tennis or drive a car when he's older either. So it's just like a really weird balancing act. And I had to find out a way for like his new caretakers and doctors to manage the illness so he could live into adulthood, and also mentioning the new breakthroughs that existed at the time he would have been alive, and talking about the Pauline house laws, which are like so freaking ridiculous. They were semi-Salic inheritance laws, which meant no women could ever inherit the throne unless every single male dynast was dead or disqualified. And just like how these like house laws were keeping Russia, one of many things keeping Russia like so many centuries behind the rest of the world, and just basically spoiling for a disaster, which did happen. And again, I listed like the real characters in this story, and just so many other things, like the troll who gave me the I'm not upset so much because it was a 1-star review, but it's like it was just like a personal attack, and just like pretty much everything about her review was just like ranting about the book, like how dare you do this and how dare you do that. I would have done this so much differently. Like, she wasn't reviewing the book as it was, but like reviewing the book for not being the way she would have written. And she was like saying, oh, I don't buy it, when I had listed my reasoning for why I chose not to marry Alexei to Princess Ileana of Romania, but instead matching him with a fictitious morganatic princess 7 years his senior. Like, oh, who cares if you don't buy why I chose to do certain things in my own book? You can write your own book where things happen and you do buy it because you're the creator. Like, surprise, surprise, writers get to choose how they write their own books, like 100% of everything they do. So thank you guys very much for listening. I was in a kind of a bad mood all day. The bunnies behind me on this shelf kind of reflect my mood, long story short, but I hope doing this video has helped to cheer me up a little bit. And so leave a comment down below if you like seeing front and back matter in novels, particularly historical and multicultural novels or in nonfiction books, or if you're a writer, if you like doing front and back matter yourself and the kinds of things you like to include, or maybe some things you had never thought of before. And so thank you guys again very much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.